Welcome to LabMinutes.com. In this video, we're going to show you how to install a virtual wireless LAN controller on VMware. If you've dealt with the appliance version, you know that on the controller, there's a service port that can be used for management access, which is layer 2 only with no default gateway, and there's data port that either a single or multiple links configured in either channel. Now for the vWLC, you used to have the service port, but for the data port, you only need to configure one link because it's going to be connected to a vSwitch. And then what you can do, you can bundle the physical interface at the ESXi level into a port channel that connects to a switch. And you also have the redundancy for being a VM. Now let's take a look at our lab topology. We're going to be creating a vWLC with two interfaces, a service port and the data trunk. There's a .1Q trunk. And then we're going to have an access point on VLAN 64 that will register back to the controller. Okay, now before we can start creating a VM, there's a couple of things you need to do. First, you need to have an ESXi install on the server. And if you want to be able to remotely access the CLI, you need to make sure you have a correct license that has the feature called Remote Virtual Zero Pod Concentrator. And since we're running evaluation mode, we automatically have that feature. Then you need to download an OVA file from a Cisco website. And then on the networking side of things, the configuration of the ESXi, you need to create one VLAN for your management. And for us, we're going to use VLAN 10 management, and that's going to go it's going to be used to configure your service port. And then you also need to create another type of interface that's going to be carrying all of your trunk or .1Q traffic. So here we have on the vSwitch 1, and it's already been created. We call it trunk all. And what's unique about this particular interface is instead of specifying a VLAN ID, you actually select all, so it'll be capable of carrying all the VLANs. Okay, and as a best practice, if you were to do this in the production, it's recommended for you to have a dedicated vSwitch and dedicated physical link, just like what we have in vSwitch 3 here for your data port. But for our demonstration purposes, it's okay just to put that on the same vSwitch as any other VLANs. And then on the vSwitch that carries your data, you also want to make sure that you have under security here a promiscuous mode set to accept. Okay, so now that we have all of those in place, let's go ahead and create our vWLC. So what you do, you go deploy OVF template. All right, and then you will browse to that OVA file. And for us, is version 7.3.101. We go next. You can see as part of being an OVA, all the parameter has been specified for you. So go next. Here we'll give it a name. We will call it LM-WLC1. Next, we do thick provision. Next, we'll just leave that default. We'll edit it in a few minutes. So go finish, and now the VM is being created. Okay, so now the VM has been successfully created. We're going to go ahead and edit the VM. Okay, so edit settings. Here, the network adapter 1 is your service port, and we're going to have that connect to VLAN 10 management. And for adapter 2, that's your data port. So we're going to have it connected to the trunk all. Now, to provide remote access to your WLC, vWLC, you need to go ahead and add a serial port. And we're going to do this over the network. It's going to be acting as a server. And for the URI, you need to specify your ESXi IP and the port that you would like to use. So this port will get mapped directly to the VM console. So ESXi IP is 10.4, and we'll just choose that for the port. We'll go next, finish, and OK. So by default, the port might be firewalled off in the ESXi, so what you need to do, you need to go under Configuration, Security Profile, Firewall, Properties, and if you scroll down, you need to make sure that VM serial port connected over the network is checked or allow. Okay, so that's already done for us. Next, we can go ahead and launch the VM. Okay, so play and then open the console. Okay, so just going to let that boot. Okay, here it's asking you to press any key to interrupt if you would like to use the local console for the command line, which is what we're going to do right now. But instead, if you want to use the telnet sessions to get into the command line, then you would not interrupt that, which we will do in later on in this video. So right now, we'll let that run. Okay. Now we're going to step through the setup wizard. And the first thing it's asking you for is the system name. We'll call it LM-WLC1. Admin username, and then the password. And then confirm the password. And we would want to give a static IP to the service port, a service interface. And the IP is going to be 192.168.10.104/24 subnet mask. For the management, interface IP 192.16.32.104, again 24 subnet mask. The default gateway 32.1. Okay, that's VLAN 32. Interface port port number. You can see the only option we have is 1 since there's only one data port allowed. DSCP server IP, we're just going to point to the switch for now. And virtual gateway, we'll give it 1111. Group name LM-RF. SSID, let's call it the first alpha SSID, LM-internal. Bridge mode, say no. Static IP, we'll say default is yes. Radius server, we'll say no for now. Country code is US. We'll enable 11B, 11A, 11G. Outdoor RF, yes. NTP server, yes. And NTP server is a switch, 32.1. Poll time, 3600. And we said yes, those are the correct configuration. Okay. So it's going to reboot the controller, looks like. So this time, instead of doing the press any key, we're just going to let that run. Because this time we're trying to use the remote telnet access and see what it looks like. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring up a telnet session, and 10.4 is our ESXi IP, and port is 32104. Let's connect. Okay, so you can see we're starting to get some output on our telnet session. Let me change that color in the background real quick. There you go. Okay, so while that's running, let's do some ping to a service port IP so we know what comes up. Oh, you can see that you can ping that already. Oh, look at that. You got user prompt, and you can lock in using your admin account that we set up, and now we are at the controller command line prompt. Okay, now on the switch, let's see if we can ping 32.104 IPs, and we could. Okay, so now let's go ahead and bring up a browser. Okay, so it will be 192.168. We're just going to use the service port IP to access. Okay, now we're going to lock into the web interface. Okay, and here it is. Okay, the first thing to notice right here is the count for the access point support is 0. Okay, and that's by default. There's no license installed. So the next thing you need to do is to switch on or install your license, but for us we're going to do evaluation license. So you go to management and software activation licenses, and we're going to have to switch the priority from low to high. We'll set the priority, click OK, accept the EULA, and it's prompting you to reboot the controller. Before we do that, we're going to go and save config, and then we're going to reboot the controller. So commands and reboot and reboot. Okay. As you can see here, having this telnet on this telnet session, it looks just like you have a serial cable connected to the controller. Even during the controller reboot, you can see all the outputs. So that's like a virtual console cable for you. Okay, so our ping is gone already. Let's give it a few seconds for this controller to reboot. Okay, while we're waiting for that to come up, just want to show you on the switch one, we already have a DSCP scope configured for our access point on the VLAN 64, so 172.16.64, and this is a hex value for the controller's IP. And we also have a access point that has been plugged into the switch and is trying to do a controller discovery and trying to register to the controller. Okay. Alright, so it looks like we got our ping back. So it's trying to lock back into the controller. Okay, you can see now the count for access point support has become 200. Alright. Now we'll go to the wireless. Okay, so let's take a look at the AP, and on the AP output, it's complaining about some certificate verification fail, and it cannot establish the DTLS connection to the controller. So right here, failed to authorize controller, certificate fail. So let's see what we need to do here. We can try to wipe out the config on the controller. So the command for that, wipe out the config on the AP. So the command is clear. We can do capwap and then private config. We can also do clear lwap private config, and then we go ahead and do reload. So you can see the message right here. It said failed to authorize controller using trust config. So what seems to be happening is I've used this AP in the past to register to a different controller, and it might still have the old config on it that potentially has been signed by a different controller. So it tries to obtain the self-signed cert from this controller. It fails the certificate verification. So that's why I was complaining about. It fails to authorize the controller using the trust config. So in a sense, we're trying to clear the access point config, so it can try to build that from scratch and have the configuration signed by our new controller here. So let's see what happens when it comes back up. And while we're waiting for the AP to come up, one of the most important thing you need to be aware of is your access point needs to be running a software version 7.3 or later. And that's a requirement to have the access point registered to the vWLC. So we have a nice blog article on our website, which will post the URL down below, that you can go and take a look at and see the different options of how you can get the access point up to the required code. So let's see what we have here. Looks like still trying to discover the controller. Okay, so looks like this time, let's see what we have. Okay, so since we clear the config on the AP, when the AP came up, it said right here, failed to load configuration from flash, and then it resets the config to the default, and that's essentially remove the previously signed config, and now it's just going to download the config from scratch from the controller. And now you see the AP is trying to send a join request, and it has successfully joined to the controller, and the radio interface came up as well. So if we go back to the controller here, we will see our AP successfully join with the MAC address as AP name, which is happen by default. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead, since we're going to have our user coming in on VLAN 64, we need to create a controller interface for that VLAN. So let's call it LM wireless user, and VLAN ID is 64. Click apply. The IP is going to be 172.16.64.104. /24 and gateway 64.1, DSCP pointing to the switch. Okay, and we'll go apply. And then on the SSID, we need to bind that to our new interface. Okay. Alright, so now let's go to our test PC. And when we look at the available SSID, we do not see the LM internal that we have created, and the reason being, let's go back to the access point. And when the access point first joins the controller and it comes up, it will be in the AP mode local. And that particular mode is not supported by the vDLC. The only mode that's supported is Flex Connect, so you need to switch from local to Flex Connect. And at the same time, let's update our AP name as well. So click Apply. Click OK. Alright, so the AP right here in the back has responded to that config update, and now it's going to go ahead and reboot itself to have the mode change. Okay, so while we're waiting for that, let me show you the blog post that we have on our website that I told you about. So you can go to www.labminutes.com. Okay, if you go under blog, okay, you'll see it right there with the Cisco Virtual LAN Controller 7.3 installation caveat, and under there it explains what you need to look for when you're trying to install a vWLC, as far as having your AP registered to it and seeing the SSID. So here it tells you the supported APs, as well as some debug output config. Okay. Alright, so it looks like our AP is back. Let's see if it registered yet. Alright, it's still coming up, looks like. Alright, looks like let's just join the AP. And here it is, with the AP name updated, and the mode, AP mode, is now Flex Connect, and by default it should be centrally switched for the SSID. Okay, so now let's go back to our PC, test PC, do a refresh. You can see right away, here is the LM internal SSID that we configured. Okay, so let's see if we can connect to that. Go to the SSID. We're going to switch the security to pre-share key. Apply. And now when we're trying to connect, click OK. Let's bring up a command line, and let's go ahead and try to ping 32.1, for example. Okay, looks like we can ping now, and when you look at the status of the connection, sure enough, it got an IP on the VLAN 64. So it looks like we are good to go. Okay, so that wraps up our video on the installation of the virtual wireless LAN controller in VMware. Thank you for watching LabMinutes.com. I'll see you guys in the next video.